Welcome to our Facebook Live today, Managing Screen Time During COVID-19, Unique Challenges, Practical Tips. We're so glad you joined us, and we're super excited to welcome our guest, Jill Hornbacher, who is Director, External Communications for Comcast Corporation. In this role, Jill is responsible for developing, planning, and implementing all strategic external communications for Comcast's Minnesota, Wisconsin, Kansas, and Missouri service areas. Jill has a bachelor's degree in communications from the University of North Dakota and nearly 25 years of experience in corporate communications and public relations, having previously worked at Target and Seagate. She is also the mom to an 11th grade son, so she is living everything we're talking about today. So we are so thrilled to have Jill with us. Thank you so much for joining us, Jill.
Yes, thank you for having me. It's wonderful to be here with you ladies.
Well, we're thrilled to have you, and we are joined today with my mom, Marti, as well, Dr. Marti Erickson, and I'm Erin Erickson, and we are the co-hosts of Mom Enough, and so thank you so much for tuning in. So, Jill, what have you heard or seen as parents' biggest concern about their children's internet use?
Oh, it's a great question. You know what? The number one thing that we hear is, what do I do? There's no rules. I tell moms often, we are the first set of parents that are actually parenting in a generation of social media and screen time. And so I can't call my mom and say, Mom, what did you do when I was on Snapchat too much?
Exactly.
We're trying to figure that out. And so a lot of parents just are figuring out what is the right amount of time for my child versus what their age is. How do I balance letting them have screen time, knowing that they also have that screen time for school use? So how do I balance the divide between school screen time and social screen time? We hear from parents, they're concerned about the content that their kids are seeing. Is it appropriate for their age level? And now they're also raising concerns about cybersecurity, with malicious attacks and what's happening to their devices. And so you really see a gamut of concerns from parents about managing screen time.
Well, I have to echo a lot of those concerns as a mom to 3 high schoolers, and it's kind of a constant battle. And as you brought up this kind of issue of schoolwork online now, especially during the pandemic, and then they have computers from school, and then they also have computers that are more personal computers. We have computers in the home, and it's really hard to manage all this different technology, phones and laptops and iPads and desktops. It's almost it's almost unmanageable in some ways. It can feel, and so it's so hard. And I definitely share the concerns about what our kids are accessing online. So we know that kids are seeing things that we wouldn't want them to see. And it's kind of a scary terrain out there in the online world.
Absolutely. And you know what? We say we're all in this together, right? I mean, nobody has a perfect formula for managing screen time, and everybody has to do what's right for their own family and their own needs and the ages of their children. And we're all just trying to figure it out. And, a lot of the moms that we talk to really just are very vulnerable in their conversations about maybe I let my kid watch too much, or maybe am I being too strict? There's no right or wrong answer. It's just really about balancing what's appropriate for your family and knowing that as parents, we have each other's back and we continue to figure out, what is the appropriate amount. And to your point, with COVID, most of the rules that people had set before have been completely thrown out the window.
Yeah, absolutely. I know I'm definitely letting my kids spend a little bit more time online than I typically would.
And yet kids still need balance in their lives, and we adults do too. And, I think that's where we really kind of feel some guilt and anxiety. I'm past the child rearing years, but I have a lot of contact with my 5 grandchildren who are all adolescents. They range from 12 to 16. And I feel real concerned. And when they are at my house, we actually don't get together indoors with my son and his family because they're a little more out and exposed. We do see Erin's family inside, but I really struggle with this too. What should the limits be when they're at my house, which is generally when they're not doing online school, so they don't have that as an excuse. But I think we all, adults and kids, fall into the habit of just being on our screens all the time because so many other things have been taken away from us. And yet we really do need the balance of being face to face with people rather than communicating online, being outdoors, certainly. And I know we'll talk more as we go along about some of those things that we really do need to remember to do. But I think it's really challenging, and even for grandparents. So, Jill, you talked a little bit already, I think, about how the pandemic has changed screen time usage. But is there more that you want to say about that? I know you're very, very close to this, both personally and also in your profession working with Comcast.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'd say the pandemic has made screen time and access to the internet even more relevant than it already was. I mean, we need to make sure that everybody is connected, is staying connected. Over the course of the pandemic, when it first hit, we saw internet spikes from 30 to 60% in across our footprint. We saw internet usage around video conferencing up almost nearly 300%, excuse me. So a huge amount of people that all of a sudden are now taking to the internet, using video conferencing. And the importance of being connected is just extremely important now, especially with distance learning too. And so we are proud here at our company. We have a program called Internet Essentials that helps low-income Americans get connected to the internet for $9.95 a month. And so we are partnering with school districts across the country, across the Twin Cities, to make sure that we are connecting those individuals that do not have access, that they do get that access, because we know that that is extremely important. And to my point, around the pandemic, you're just seeing the relevancy of it increase significantly. We saw a lot of shifts in terms of we have a platform that I know we'll talk about a little bit later called Xfinity XFi that helps you manage and personalize your home Wi-Fi. But during the peak of the pandemic, we saw parents shifting the amount of time that they allowed on their children's device from 3 hours to 4 hours. We saw 75% of our parents engage in the pause feature because they wanted to make sure that they were giving that downtime to their kids, given that everyone's stuck at home. And we saw people really taking the time to pause devices more so at the lunch hour than the dinner hour, which was really interesting. You kind of needing a little bit of a day break. So the pandemic truly has impacted everybody in many different ways. And we're proud here at Comcast to make sure that we are working with our customers and the consumers at large to make sure that they are connected, they stay connected. We have opened up all of our outdoor public Wi-Fi hotspots for individuals. So if you don't have internet access, but you're out, we provide that internet and Wi-Fi for you for no cost. And we're doing that all the way through the end of 2020.
That's so awesome.
That's great.
That's so fantastic. And I think that issue of digital equity is so important. As we have these conversations, as people who can probably afford to pay for the internet usage, that it's really important to recognize how many families cannot do that, and how many families this pandemic has created just an immense burden when it comes to digital access. And so that digital equity piece is something that I really respect about what Comcast is doing as far as their mission of making internet available to all families, because we certainly wouldn't want children to be left behind when it comes to school, or parents to be unable to work because they don't have access. So that's a huge win there as far as I'm concerned. So what things make it difficult for folks to stay on top of their family's internet use and kind of keep a healthy level, especially with school starting and distance learning or hybrid learning for a lot of families and many parents working at home? I know on a given day that there are up to 4 people in my house online at any given time. And it can just be really a big challenge to kind of stay on top of all of our internet use. And I know for me, like I've definitely found myself drifting over to social media a little more than I usually do. And I've set some personal limits just to kind of keep things in a reasonable level. But I think we're all a little bit bored in some ways too. So I'm curious about your thoughts on how we kind of manage that, maintaining a healthy internet level or use of online technologies.
Yeah, I think part of it is, setting rules that are right for your family and the age limits of your children. I think it's really important to sit down and have an honest conversation with your family and your children about the internet itself, how it works, about how ads pop up. What does that mean? The content, all of that. I think this is really important to have that conversation about truly what the internet is and what it can be for you. I think consistency is another thing that I'm personally working through that right now. My son, like you had mentioned, he's a junior in high school. He's in hybrid learning, so he goes in school 2 days a week, and the other days he's from home. And so we're really stressing at our house, how do you remain consistent each day with what your schedule is so you can best manage time, and that your screen time for school is during these times, and your screen time for social and personal use is these times. And so trying to stay consistent every day, it's not easy because every day is a little bit different. But I think those are some of the things that people are struggling with, but that you can really work hard to just sit down and have those conversations as a family to really help make sure that you do stay on track. And quite frankly, give yourself a break. Some days you might, like you said, wander on social media too much, and that's okay. I mean, every day is a little bit different, and we are all working through an unprecedented time, and nobody has a playbook for how we're supposed to do this. And so I think you just have to cut yourself a little bit of slack and make sure that you're just staying on top of some of the things that are truly important to you and your family, and having those honest conversations about screen time and internet use. I would say that we are seeing, especially now, a lot of cybersecurity. A lot of people are trying to take advantage of the pandemic and trying to send malicious threats and viruses into people's devices. And so what I say to a lot of our customers and friends and moms of mine is be wary of some of those coronavirus specific emails and don't check them. Make sure you know who the sender is. Don't share your personal information, especially with kids online more in the home. They tend to be getting some more of those malicious threats. And so just having that conversation with your children about cybersecurity and the importance of that, I think is really important as well.
That's
Jill.
Go ahead, Mom.
Well, I just want to reinforce what Jill just said. And I think it's so crucial that we teach our kids how to recognize things that are phishing or scams, but also even with the ads, it's a great opportunity to teach our kids to be critical thinkers about what other people are trying to get them to do. And with social media and the internet, the ads are so specific because they're following what we're doing, and I'm just kind of horrified sometimes when I see the ads that are popping up when I'm, looking at our Mom Enough Facebook page. I don't even do social media much personally at all, but I do because with Mom Enough, it's a very important way for us to connect with our listeners and to learn from and with parents. But still, the ads that pop up, are so personalized and obviously often of interest to us because the way those algorithms work, they know where we go and what we like to look at. And so I think those are really important things to teach our kids. And I appreciate your focusing in on that. One concrete thing that I do myself, this doesn't involve children, but it's just the way I try to manage the intrusions into my own a daily agenda for work and other things, is to turn off notifications, because it's so tempting if you're working on something that's important, and with kids it might be an assignment that they have to get in to their teacher, but if they see a notification pop up that they got a message from a friend or that there's something interesting happening, that really is a distraction. I've heard some young people talk about that, how they really have to contain those kinds of external distractions or control them in the ways that are possible.
That's a great suggestion, Mom. And Jill, I want to hang out with you more because I love how you say that, maybe we just need to give ourselves a little bit of a break right now. So you're definitely the kind of person I want to be friends with. Someone who can give me good feelings about the bad choices I'm making from time to time. So I love that.
Is she saying that as her mom, I don't do that? I hope not.
No, Mom's great too, but
I'm teasing.
It's always good to kind of get that message of letting ourselves off the hook a little bit. And I think that message really applies overall to our children as well. Maybe they are spending a bit more time doing, FaceTiming with friends or playing video games. And that's really the core of their social connection right now. And so it can kind of go against the grain of what we're used to, or maybe the limits we usually set around those things. And so to now kind of, loosen the reins a little bit. And I like how, as you said, families were shifting their limits from 3 hours to 4 hours. And then I especially loved when you were talking about families turning down hitting pause over the lunch hour. I mean, it is so important that we remember that family connection is really a big part of surviving this pandemic from an emotional and mental health standpoint. So do you have, go ahead, Mom.
Well, I was just going to say, so many families say that one of the really positive things to come out of this horrific pandemic is that families are eating together, and a lot of families, both lunch and dinner. And even my husband and I, who are empty nesters, we're having 2 meals a day together usually, and really having conversation that we haven't typically had. Certainly not in the middle of the day because we both had busy careers. But I think for all of us, whatever our household constellation is, we can really see the positives in that.
Yeah, that's great. So Jill, do you have other tips for managing screen time?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think, like I said, the first thing is really just sitting down, having that conversation, and then setting those time limit rules for your child based on the age. I mean, as they age and things change, the time limit that you allow your child to be on screen time is going to evolve. I know in our household, it absolutely has evolved. Being the fact that my son is a junior in high school, many of his classes actually, he needs to have his phone. He had, for instance, a digital photography class. He needed access to his phone and taking photos and editing them. And so the amount of screen time then that we allow him at his age is very different than the screen time we allowed him when he was 12 years old, for instance. So I think that's my advice to parents, is really just, it's not a one size fits all, but really looking at their particular age. I think it's great to have a shared space where you can set up a family computer or family iPad. That's a great way to kind of monitor your kids' screen time versus letting them hibernate in their room and being on the screen all day. I think having that shared common space is really important. I think, having some control over, or, parental control over the devices. And, there's many, I know our X5 platform has a parental control, but I know that some of the devices have settings to see, adding that extra layer. So I think that that's a really important piece. I think really too, one thing that we try to do that I recommend for parents is, before you allow your kid to download an app or go on a website, make sure that as a parent, you understand what that app does or what that website is all about, so that you can say, is that appropriate for my kid? I mean, I've had to learn over the years, like, okay, what is Snapchat? What is TikTok? What, is this appropriate for your age or not? And so I think it's really important to spend the time kind of educating yourself on and previewing those apps. I know Common Sense Media is a great resource for folks to learn about different apps and websites and what's appropriate by age level. So I would highly recommend folks check out Common Sense Media to find out some more information. Yeah, seeking out apps that are more interactive, I think, is really good advice. So it's, to your point, folks, kids need that socialization, but it's better to be on an app that maybe some of your friends are on. You can have that conversation versus, being on a site that it's just very individualized. So I think having that balance is really important. And then setting a good example. I mean, I'm in the public relations industry, so it's really easy to have my phone with me 24/7. But I need to try to set a good example. So if we make rules and say no phones at the dinner table, I need to make sure that applies to me as well. Maybe we have advice to say nobody's putting their phone in their bedroom overnight. Everybody has to store it in the mudroom. So, but I have to follow those same rules. And sometimes, I'll be honest, I break them. And I have to then sit down and educate my family to say, all right, well, right now, mom's waiting on a really important phone call or have to respond to something. And so educating them that this isn't, it isn't always a one size fits all. I realize I'm kind of breaking the rules, but explaining why I had to break the rules. So I try to be a good example as much as I possibly can.
Oh, that's so wise. And it can be hard. So I sometimes default to saying grown up privilege when I decide that I want to do something that I've told the kids I don't want them to do, which they don't love. So I think that's super wise. I also love that you brought up common sense media. We use that all the time for movies, for, just all sorts of things. It's super helpful because some of those movies that we watched growing up, I thought like, oh yeah, it's PG. This will be great for the kids. And then you start watching it and you're like, whoa, wait a minute, not so great. Let's check common sense media and make sure. And then surprise, it's more for older kids. So I'm glad you brought up that resource.
Can I inject one thing here? I think about setting limits. I two points I have really triggered by what you were saying, Jill. One is that there is some good research that looks at what kids think about their parents' use of devices. And, it's very interesting because I think really the kids' views of our use of devices is not all that different from our view of their use. And so often there's concern on both sides of these intergenerational relationships. But another point is that it's so helpful, I think, to engage the kids, even from very early ages, in defining the rules of the house. And, with many aspects of parenting and limit setting, and this goes back to my research as a developmental psychologist, we find that when kids are involved in setting the rules, they often set more conservative rules, stricter rules for themselves. And I remember when Erin and her older brother were adolescents, and I would involve them in determining what was an appropriate curfew if they were, when they were old enough to go out in the evening on their own, and other kinds of household rules. And I do this with younger kids. What are the rules for playing in the swimming pool, for being in the pool with other kids, or just all sorts of everyday things. And so I would always be curious to see what kids would come up with if they started even just on their own without the adults present. What rules would they set? And then for parents and children to talk together and come up with realistic rules for, as you say, Jill, everybody in the household, parents too.
Yeah, that's good advice, Mom. And I think it is so interesting when we look at our own usage. And I remember when the kids were little being at the park, and there was a boy at the park who hit my son, and I was looking for the mom and saw her, and she was sitting just like this for, the whole time and looking at her phone. And I was kind of distressed by that because the mom was so caught up in her own device that she wasn't really paying attention to what her son was doing. And I suspect that some of his acting out was because his mom wasn't paying attention. Maybe he was looking to get some attention. And so I think it's really important for us to take inventory of our own use and be honest with ourselves, and also, as Jill said, be forgiving of ourselves too. So, yeah. So Jill, I know you have a lot of tools and resources that are helpful in monitoring families' use of the internet, especially at home. Could you tell us a bit more about some of those tools?
Sure, absolutely. Like you said, Common Sense Media is a great resource. They're a partner of ours at Comcast, and so I would absolutely, recommend checking that out. If you are a Comcast customer, I would say what a game changer is our Xfinity XFi platform. So if you go to xfinity.com/XFi, XFI, you can learn all about it. But it has been an awesome platform that we introduced a little over 3 years ago that really helps you manage and control and personalize your home Wi-Fi system. So you can see your Wi-Fi password. You can troubleshoot. You can see all of the devices that are connected to your home Wi-Fi. We allow you to create profiles for your home. So I have a profile, for instance, in our home for myself, my husband, our son, guests, and then household items like our smart TVs and the Alexas of the world. You can create those profiles and then assign those specific devices to those profiles. And then you can do awesome things with those profiles. You can set time limits. You can set bedtime modes. When the Wi-Fi turns off, you can set weekend bedtime modes. You can turn on parental controls. You can pause all the devices at once. You can pause just one device at once. There's advanced security on the X5 platform that helps give that extra layer of security against what we talked about earlier, cybersecurity threats, malicious viruses. The awesome thing with the platform by far is the pause feature and really being able to look at your own child's devices and assign them to them and really set the right schedule and time limits. So for example, like I'd mentioned, my son is a almost 17-year-old, but we have under his device, it's his iPad, or excuse me, his iPhone, his school laptop, his Xbox, and his Alexa device. During the school days when he's hybrid here, I pause every device except the laptop because it's like you need to pretend like you're actually in school. And if a teacher sees you pull out that phone in school, in the classroom, it's going to be taken away. So that same thing should really be held true here at home. And so sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But if I'm like, okay, you're really using it too much, I'll pause that particular, device at that time. So it really allows you to have amazing control and features without necessarily saying, okay, it's time to get off, time to get off. If you set, for instance, a limit of 3 hours, 4 hours for your kids' time to be on the internet, after that time is up, it will automatically shut off the Wi-Fi to all of the devices that are assigned to your child. So you don't have to worry about, hey, it's to your point. We had that conversation earlier. What is the appropriate amount of time for me to be on my screen? Okay, we set it at 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, whatever that might be. And as soon as that time is up, it all gets shut off. And if they come back up and say, Mom, turn on the Wi-Fi, I'd be like, no, remember we sat down and we said, this is going to be your time limit for the day. So it allows a lot of amazing features to really feel like you have full control over the Wi-Fi in your home. The nice thing too is because you can assign guests. I have like a guest profile and I assign, some of my son's friends to it or our friends. And if, some of the friends are hanging out here or staying overnight and I say, hey, my son's phone needs to be turned off at midnight, 1 a.m., whatever. Obviously he's a high schooler, so it's a little bit later. I apply those same rules to his friends' devices. So it isn't like, oh, well, my device got shut off, but boy, we can use, XYZ person's device to look at all of this stuff. So it's that consistency and that balance, but the X5 platform really helps put the control in your hands and allows you to do a lot of amazing features. So I would highly recommend checking it out. If you're an Xfinity customer and you haven't been using it yet, it will be a difference maker for you.
I just have to say, I was just blown away when I first saw that and I had a demonstration. In fact, we did an event with you a little more than a year ago, I think. And seeing how that worked was just mind-boggling to me. I can't even imagine what it would have been like to have that kind of control over things my kids were doing. But really, I'm curious, how many devices can you control at once with that platform? Do you know?
Oh, all of them. Every device that's connected in my home, I can pause every single one of them.
And so there's no maximum.
Yeah, yep. And I can just
Wow.
pause my son's devices. I can pause my husband's devices. I can pause all of the devices. So absolutely, it works with every device in your home. The amazing thing is, and I guarantee that this number's got to be higher now, but I believe Cisco said by 2022, every individual in the home will have 13 devices themselves connected to the internet or Wi-Fi. I mean, and that's true when you think about all the Alexas of the world and your iPhone and your iPad and your laptops and your smart TVs. You can on all the smart appliances, there's so many Internet of Things that are happening right now. And so you can see that is exploding exponentially. And that's why, having the internet and the Wi-Fi and these features are so important.
I'm going to go count my devices in my house now that we've had this conversation. And Erin, with your 3 adolescent kids and 2 adults who are very tech savvy,
It's
I
a lot.
can't even imagine. I bet. Yeah.
Yeah.
I hadn't really stopped to think about it. But.
Well, the thing I love about all of this is I can be like, oh, look, you didn't do the dishes. Pause. It's like a nice consequence, because so, it's always good to have like an easy consequence at hand if one of the kids doesn't follow through on something they're expected to do, or breaks a rule in some other way. I mean, not that we're like super harsh on the kids, but we do have expectations. And so it's nice to be able to not even have like any sort of major conflict around it. Just this is the consequence, and I'm just going to push this button, and that's all I have to do. Then I can go back to Facebook, or no, I just kidding. Just kidding.
Well, it was interesting during the height of the pandemic. We saw a 75% increase in parents pausing devices from the X5 platform than we had before. I mean, so that was huge. I mean, it was just like you said, that's always been parents' favorite feature of the X5 platform. And we just saw the increase of it exponentially over the height of the pandemic.
Well, so many parents will say they're going to do something. They'll threaten a consequence. I mean, I certainly did this as a parent myself sometimes, even though I know it's not a good thing. But this really gives people a tool to do it easily. And as Erin says, you don't have the hassle. This is just what happens. So it makes it a lot easier to follow through. And I think that, limiting device use is probably the most popular consequence for parents to impose on kids, even from much earlier ages than adolescents. But, that's the one thing that really makes a difference, because they're so important. Those devices are so important to people of all ages, more important than I wish they were. But, I'm a dinosaur, so I have to catch up with this.
Yeah, it's easy to, it's not, like I've had moments where my son is on the Xbox and I said, hey, it's time to get off. You got this much longer. And if the time has come and gone and he's still on there, I'll just grab the phone and I'll be like, pause. And I'm like, oh, Fortnite's over.
That's great.
That's awesome. Can I pause my parents if my dad likes to be on his phone a lot?
Well, I would like to, pausing my husband is what I'm thinking about. He hears about 1/3 of what I say. I've actually been measuring because he's on his device, and it takes him about 2/3 of what I'm saying before he really switches his attention, even though I do all the right things to try to get his attention, say his name, stand in front of him like we do with little kids.
Well, the technology can be a distraction for all of us. Well, this was so great, though, Jill. Thank you so much for joining us. Again, we've been talking with Jill Hornbacher, Director, External Communications for Comcast Corporation. And thank you so much for all your wisdom and tips, and for telling us about these great tools that we can use. And thank you to you, all of you, for tuning in and listening to this episode of Mom Enough Live with Comcast today. And we will make sure to post a recording of this so you can watch it again and tune in at any time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jill.